what impacted their ability to finish when they first started, and then for some of those who've gone back, like what's helped them move forward. And so for us, it's an opportunity to hear what's working and what's not working in higher education as people that discuss and impact policy. So first we're going to go ahead and start with our Director of Research, Walter Ochenko, who's going to talk a little bit about some of what he's found in his research. Most of you should have a PowerPoint presentation that we handed out to you. We had a technical difficulties here, so we're relying on the trusty paper right now. So we'll go ahead and hand it on over to Walter.
So I'm not going to get into the details of all the statistics in the PowerPoint. I just want to give you kind of an overview. So before I summarize the findings of our research and non-completion, I wanted to highlight several recurring themes in the stories of these 4 veterans. They all attended multiple institutions. Some experienced a lack of campus support for veterans. For some, health issues or personal issues affected their academic performance. For some, school was a cultural shock and they may have lacked confidence in their own abilities. Financial issues contributed to interruptions in their attendance. VA payments were late or insufficient to cover expenses. Some had to work full-time or part-time while in school. And some were in active duty service and it interrupted their education. So these stories are not stories of non-completion. Their stories are not stories of non-completion, but rather the challenges that all 4 veterans faced in earning a post-secondary education. And now 2 have degrees and 2 are still pursuing their degrees. None of these veterans would have been captured in the data that we use for our report on veteran non-completion because none were first-time students, which was the focus of the education department data that we used. However, their experiences are reflective of our findings. So what did we do? First, compared to non-veterans, a much smaller proportion of veterans in our data left school without a degree. Twice as many non-veterans failed to complete as veterans. Second, the data likely overstates those who left school because some veterans take enrollment breaks, like these 4 veterans did, and then they return to school. In fact, the veterans we studied were more likely to have taken enrollment breaks if they were still enrolled or had graduated compared to those who left school without a degree. From other VES research, we know that veteran persistence is very strong. 40% of veterans who completed certificates or degrees in 2015-2016 began their education in 2005 or earlier. Third, non-completion is higher among students with certain risk factors and even higher for those with multiple risk factors. Some of the risk factors affected the attendance of these 4 veterans. They enrolled in 2 or more institutions during their education. They had a disability. They worked full-time, or they had part-time enrollment. So what are the takeaways from our examination of veteran non-completion? Well, first, student-veteran resilience exceeds that of non-veterans. Second, additional federal or institutional support would help alleviate some of the risk factors that bolster non-completion. And bolster completion. Targeted institutional grants or work-study options would help to ease financial stress and reduce or eliminate the need to work while attending school. 30% of veterans in our database had a disability. Better access to VA and campus-based healthcare is essential. Research suggests that focusing on just one risk factor is insufficient. Programs fostering persistence and attainment must be broad in scope.
Thank you, Walter. We'll dive a little bit more into some of the concepts that Walter touched on in his presentation. One of the things that I find interesting, and I think is a conversation that needs to be addressed, is how we're tracking success for non-traditional students as a whole. Because a lot of students, a lot of military-connected students, are not first-time students going back to school. It's a process, it's a route, and when you look at it on the long term, it looks a lot smaller than it really is. Because we do see, based on SVA's and VES data and some other research, that military-connected students do better more often than not than their counterparts in higher education. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to give each of our 4 panelists, these guys are pretty awesome people and I'm really excited to hear from them. We're going to give them each an opportunity to share with you their experience in higher ed and where they're at today. So we'll start with Brandon.
Hey everyone, my name is Brandon Dibbens. I now live in Atlanta, Georgia. And kind of keep it short and sweet, pretty much where it happened with me with the VA, it was more on the financial and kind of the community side. When I left the military in 2010, I started school at University of South Carolina and also going dual enrollment at a community college for Midlands Tech. And what was happening at that time, I was super excited, gotten out of the military, getting ready to do my whole thing and actually better myself. Went to school, kind of realized that the VA had other priorities and that was not really paying much attention to student veterans. One issue that kind of actually came about was from the financial side, due to the slow processing times that the VA had. I would go 2, 3, sometimes even 4 months without a BAH payment, and you all are pretty young as well, and everyone lives here in lives here in DC, so you know housing is pretty expensive. Your landlords don't really care too much when the government doesn't want to give you a check. So what I had to do was pretty much almost fight being homeless. I kind of had to stop going to school for a time and just start working full time. Luckily, I am back in school right now, finishing up my degree. I was blessed and fortunate enough to find other roles that looked past my me not having a 4-year degree, which is good. I now work in tech consulting. I love it. Go sales loft. Had to put that plug there. But I will say the bad part was just not having a community because I was kind of thrown into school and not really knowing what to do. And also just the VA's lack of caring and lack of empathy. Probably the most embarrassing thing was having my landlord actually call in to the VA with me, and the VA saying, well, he's good for the money, can you just wait a few more months? And him saying, well, I have a mortgage payment I also have to make. Either he gets the money in a week or he's gonna get evicted. So let that just sink in, and that was kind of one of the big problems that I had with the VA that faced me. It kind of led to a break in my education.
Thanks, Brian. My name is Robert Davis. I got out of the military. I was in the Navy. I got out of the Navy in 2008, November 2008, went back to Dallas, Fort Worth, where I'm originally from. I think my academic career started off terrible. For anybody who knows how the post 9/11 GI Bill was implemented, it was very similar to the one we had just now with the Forever GI Bill, to the point where I actually had to drive down with my now ex-wife, but my wife at the time, an hour and a half south to get a check so that we could pay our rent. They were issuing emergency stipend checks. So she had to take a day off of work. I had to miss class so that I could get a check to pay my rent. And this never really stopped. Brandon mentioned he was having issues through 2011, and I remember that being as well, where book stipends weren't coming in, tuition wasn't coming in, it wasn't being paid, I wasn't getting my stipend. So that was, from the get-go, just started off terrible, especially getting out of the military and already struggling with a tough marriage and a tough transition. That my first semester of college, my wife and I separated the week before finals, so I skipped all my finals and basically was in bed that entire week. The next semester was pretty much the same. There were times where I would go several days and just couldn't leave to go to school because I was depressed. I lost all my support system through that. I wasn't connected on campus. And I ended up being suspended from school at the end of that semester. Not knowing that I was going to get suspended. So normally you go on probation, and then there's sometimes just a second probation, and then you're suspended. But the way that my college is UT Arlington, I don't mind saying this, worked is I had an incomplete grade, and so my GPA was good enough at the first semester that I wasn't suspended, but when that incomplete grade factored in at the end of my second semester, I went from being fine and registered for classes to suspended in a matter of 3 days. And then I tried to appeal, and there was nothing they would do for me. So I ended up taking, I think, about a year off of school and just worked jobs. It was a huge blow to my identity in general. Everybody was like, just go to school, you've got this GI Bill. So I never really thought about anything other than that. So I worked in restaurants, I did landscaping, construction, security. At one point in time, I was selling plasma just to make it across town to my job. Yeah. So, it was just a lot of me trying to figure out how to make it pie. Eventually I went back to school, and I still just lacked the support I needed. There was a lot of depression and mental health issues going on behind the scenes, and having tried to work with the VA in the past, I was never really able to successfully get those treated. So I went back to school and ended up failing out a second time at a community college, still just struggling to kind of just figure out who I was, and struggling financially as well. I ended up going back to school a third time and finishing my associates at community college. And I think the biggest thing that contributed to success, and that is that I got involved in student veterans advocacy. I started working at the college as a VA work study. I ended up starting a student veterans chapter, became the president of that, and found at least something bigger than myself. If I couldn't invest in myself, I could at least invest in others. And that helped a little bit to kind of keep me going. Ended up becoming involved with Student Veterans of America on a national level with them, and ended up becoming a VFW SVA Fellow in 2016, which is where I was introduced to legislative advocacy, advocating for the need for priority course enrollment for veterans in higher ed. But even then, I think my depression and mental health was still kind of running unchecked. I came back from my week in DC, which was arguably the greatest week of my life up to that time, and then spent the next week in bed because I had crashed so hard and felt so out of it that I couldn't even go to school. At that point, I was also split between a 4-year college and a 2-year college because of their enrollment policies. I couldn't get a full course load at the university, so I was still split, trying to do classes in the morning at one university and in the evening at the other, unable to work outside of that. And my GI Bill ended up running out in the spring of 2016. I had had enough false starts that I finally ran out of benefits. I also ended up moving to DC at that time. I realized that this is where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do, and I was bullheaded enough to think that I could make it up here despite not having a degree in one of the toughest places in the world. And I've been up here since 2016. I've continued my advocacy efforts, and in some ways I've worked for a few different VSOs, helping people get involved on the Hill or doing program management. But at the end of the day, I was never really able to do what I want, which is legislative advocacy and policy work, because of my lack of a degree. So I've recently kind of left the veteran space, became a full-time personal trainer. I'm kind of working on getting disability so I can hopefully get back into school in the next year or so.
We're going to work with you on that. We're
Cool.
going to get you back in school.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you all for having us. My name is Adam Legrand. I'm currently a graduate student at Syracuse University and serving as the Student Veterans Organization president. My journey to college started after I enlisted in the New York Air National Guard in July of 2001. Due to military requirements, I couldn't really go to school full time for a lot of reasons, and I was on the other predecessor to the post 9/11 GI Bill, which paid me a stipend of about $230 a month. $230 a month on Long Island, New York is not enough to pay for your books and food and gas and housing, and it just wasn't going to work. So I am forever thankful for anybody in the room that's been able to help get the post 9/11 GI Bill and now the Forever GI Bill, because if I had that, I may have been more successful. And being so early in the war on terror, there really wasn't a lot of resources at my colleges, both a community college and a major university, to have any sort of support for a veteran that was supposed to have New York State tuition waiver, and it didn't happen because of paperwork issues. So working through that, I just ran out of money and I was swimming in debt, and I wanted to serve full-time anyway, so I went active duty and took a strategic pause for several years and went to a couple for-profit schools through the military because you got to get promoted, right? But still couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. I got out, and that's where I started having my mental health issues with night terrors. You all see that I have a service animal, which helped me become myself again, which helped make me go back to school a little bit easier. However, I didn't have her while I was going to Piedmont Community College, just a couple hours south of here in Charlottesville. Part of the issue of why I left was I can't support my 2 children on the GI Bill, and they had no way of offering me a work study because they didn't know that one existed through the VA, and I made too much money previously as a banker, which was barely over minimum wage to qualify for a federal work study, so I was told. So I'd make another strategic chance to quit. And also in that mix, I went to another not-for-profit school online, and I just couldn't go to school online. And through my time working at a VA hospital down in Richmond, Virginia, I realized that I needed to help make changes within the veteran community. And that's when I learned how to self-advocate and start getting the help that I need and developing a support system. So when I finally got into Syracuse University to complete my bachelor's and now a master's and grad certificates, it wouldn't have happened if the Forever GI Bill, post 9/11 GI Bill wasn't there to pay the amount that I'm getting in VAH, mostly on time. The VA work studies and some part-time things that I do here and there on campus to be able to afford to pay child support and commute to see my kids it just wouldn't be possible. So I could have dropped out many times at Syracuse, not because that there aren't resources available as a model institution, but I have issues when it comes to traumatic brain injury. I need some accommodations. Take an econ test, I need an hour and a half rather than an hour. So having these basic accommodations was something that didn't really exist for the veteran space at that time. And coincidentally, around the same time, I was getting some support from an admissions officer, as well as NatCon 2017 with the Student Veterans of America. And hey, Adam, we want you to start a disability and education program here at Syracuse. And because of that program, we've been able to stop veterans like myself that have money issues or finance issues, because my job is to help get resources for that disabled veteran or any veteran through my network on campus. We're still seeing people drop out for disability needs. So maybe if there's a way to instill a program that goes along with the GI Bill, just like Voc Rehab, how do we advertise these services? Maybe somebody like a Veteran Success on Campus VA official staff member, VA employee, not university VA certifying official, to go hand in hand. We do have tutoring available. I didn't know I had tutoring available until 2 semesters ago when I was about to graduate with my undergrad. So to know what's available, how to access it, and pave the way, I think that's the best way that we can keep veterans in education and keep our graduation rates as high as they currently are. So again, thank you.
Hello everyone. Thank you for being here. It means a lot that you're here and present to address these issues that veterans are facing. So my name's Amanda, and I'm from the small state of South Dakota, and I go to South Dakota State University, and I'm going for human biology, so hopefully to become a PA. So I'm not giving up on that. When I initially joined the military, my family did not approve, so they kicked me out of the house. And I was just National Guard at the time, so I had problems going to school because all I knew for about 2 years of training was just Army and getting up, go to PT, and you return back to your post. So when I went to school, it was a really hard transition because I missed that foundation of my family. So I didn't know really how to identify myself. And eventually I fell into this kind of the bad group of colleges, and I think we all know what that is. It's just partying too much, not going to class, and just not addressing what the real problem was, which is just my depression, and not knowing how to deal with that as a young kid coming out of the military. So I left school knowing that I needed to grow up a little bit, and I moved to the large city of Sioux Falls, which is only 100,000 people. And I started working at a prison there. So you can imagine you have to grow up pretty quick when you start working at a prison as a corrections officer. And then I volunteered for a deployment because I firmly believe that every unit should have a medic when they deploy, and this unit didn't have one. So I deployed for a year in Afghanistan, and I came back, and I knew at that point, I knew for a fact that I wanted to go back and earn my degree as a PA and to help people in every community, regardless of income or any sort of situation. So I returned to SDSU, and the VA office was kind of in shambles at the time. They were a very small office. It was only one staff member there to help us. But she did a great job for the amount of people that she had to accommodate. And that's when I started being an advocate for veterans on my campus, and I started a student veterans organization with the help of the SVA. And we grew quite extensively. We were able to get a larger office for our Veterans Association there, and we were able to help students find a GI Bill benefit. And we're currently working on getting a counseling service specific to military veterans and to military personnel, because it's so important to have that access on campus. I firmly believe a lot of veterans struggle with bringing their own experience into the real world. If you're a comm guy, you need to know how to transition that skill set into the civilian life. So we're trying to work that out with our universities as well. And I think that would be a great thing to have for every public or private university to have for their veterans. It's just this untapped source of people that can just really succeed in our nation and growing it, making it stronger. So I'm working hard to bring things forward and to help other student veterans so they don't have to go through what I did, and just know that there's support there to bring them to their dream career.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I think what you see here is very representative of a large number of military-connected students and the challenges that are faced, not just with military-connected, and I refer to military-connected, I didn't define this in the earlier part of the day, but we look at military-connected to include active duty, student veterans, dependents, survivors, and anyone who's affiliated with the military. And obviously, you're going to see different types of issues with some of the students, especially if you have your younger dependents or survivors who are going for the first time. But what you see in general are first generation, some low income, minority, and other underserved populations. And what they're doing as they're going through is navigating the pathways of higher education. How many of you went to school only as a traditional undergraduate student and never went back? Okay, so we have a lot of people in here. How many of you are first generation students? Raise my hand. What you see typically is some things that you heard across the board here. One of them was not even aware of what resources are available on campus to support their military-connected students, whether it be tutoring, mental health care, because there are programs on campuses that schools don't always do a great job at communicating. A little bit about me, I didn't even give a look at my background. I've worked in higher education for almost 20 years. I was an associate registrar at a small nonprofit school for about 8, transferred over to Cal State Fullerton, the largest Cal State in the system, and worked there in the Vice President for Student Affairs Office. And then I went to American Council on Education, where I served as the Director of Veterans Programs for a number of years. And I worked with schools to build out programs and services to support their students. And one of the things we heard consistently with this is that they were not communicating well what programs and services were available to them. I took a number of notes from you guys as you were talking through your different faces that different challenges that you faced. One of the things I would like to touch on is we did just see in the fall, again, another struggle similar to the one that you guys faced back in 2011 with delayed payments on housing and those things. And so what are some things that you would recommend for future support should that happen again? Like, what are things that we could be aware of that we could do proactively or while it's happening to kind of ensure that students are not having to call their landlord, call with their landlord to find out where their money is? I'd be curious to hear from you guys on that.
I think Amanda over here had a pretty good idea before another meeting, and that was setting up, some sort of fund from either the school or the state or from the federal level that if that does happen, the student's not affected, because that was a big deterrent for me, and it really did kind of send me to a depression, because you have school to worry about, and then also you have money to worry about, and then when your VA counselor is telling you, hey, either come to this appointment or go to class, which one means more important to you? You shouldn't have to choose between your education or paying your rent. They both should kind of go hand in hand. And so maybe having some sort of fail-safe for the student so they're not affected by an admin error would help out tremendously.
I think the biggest thing is make sure the system's in place to roll it out. The Forever GI Bill wasn't the first time this happened. It's one thing if it happens with the post-11 GI Bill, no one expected that volume. And while it was very rough at first, I could see that they were making active efforts to fix it. They allowed us to go get emergency stipend checks. I was very surprised they didn't allow that the second time, where they were issuing them on the spot at local VAs, and then ended up having to repay it back over time, which is another issue. But I think the biggest thing is that shouldn't be something hard to fix. If you roll out something, if you're running the program if you're running the program for that and you don't have implemented, you should lose your job. I think there should be accountability behind the scenes for that, and I think there was to some degree. But I echo what Brandon said, of some sort of fail-safe whether it's the school, whether it's state veterans organizations, or federal level, of saying, you know what, here you go, here's a check, here's some money to help cover that, and we can pay it back out of your GI Bill or down the road.
One thing that you said with that, throwing money at the problem, that would help it a little, but I think you kind of hit it right there, saying the rollout of it just needs to be spot on. I mean, I work in implementation consulting at a tech company. If one of my customers gets a bad implementation, I'm gone. That doesn't happen here, and it's just a little disheartening to the vet. They've worked so hard for X amount of years, being told if you do not perform or if you do not, show your value, you're gone. You come to another organization that is supposed to be helping you and showing value, and they don't care. So it's a hard disconnect.
So one of the things we're taking this down a little bit of a different track, but I think that this is probably beneficial. One of the things that we had heard was challenges getting communication from VA about what was happening. And so VA has now stood up a monthly call for student veterans where they can call in and use the webinar and kind of get an update on what's happening with the continued implementation of Comrie. But how do you think is the most effective way to communicate with student veterans as these types of things are happening?
Well, one thing that I learned, because I was part of the folks that were, where's my money? Luckily, I was in a situation where my now fiance was able to support me with housing. It happened last week, but if I didn't have that, and I'm talking with my student veterans every day, I'm talking with our certifying officials in the school, how do we do this, how do we do that? And every time I called the VA, there is a firm wall. I could talk to somebody over here, but there's no way to get a message over to the folks processing the claims, because everything is a claim, right? If we were to somehow break down that wall and actually talk, okay, where's my name in the stack? Where are we going? The only way to do that was to send a GWIS question through the VA.gov website that has 10 to 20 day response time. So by that time, well, this is happening in August, September. I'm not going to hear back until Thanksgiving. It's unacceptable. Where I don't see VA benefits as a benefit I support, entitlement. It's really, this is what I enlisted for, and this is a workplace benefit, just like a 401k.
Right.
So it's how do we access, and it's accessing and what's available, and how do we streamline communications? There should be a single focal point that can reach out. That's just my medic coming out of case management and social work.
How many of you signed up to serve partly because of military education benefits? How many veterans do we have in the room? How many of you signed up partly because of military education benefits? That goes along with what research is showing, is that about 50% of military-connected students, they joined, or 50% of members who joined do so because of those benefits and to be able to get access to those benefits. And so I think it's really helpful for us to kind of keep that in the mind as we look at a benefit, that it is a benefit, but you're right, it's something that was promised to you when you enrolled, and so you want it to be delivered in a timely and appropriate manner. But let's circle back around, so I get the breaking down the firewall on individual claims. But as a larger group, what is the best way to communicate to you guys related to, like, hey, this webinar is coming out, we want to be able to tell you guys updates on what's happening? What is the best way to get a hold of you? Is it Facebook? Is it email? Is it phone? Like, what?
I'm 31. If it's not on my email, if it's not a push notification, I'm not going to look at it. So I mean, it's 2019. I mean, people know this stuff.
Well,
I get what you're
so
saying.
we hear that sometimes when you email the students that they get so many emails that it's just like they don't read their emails. But you're saying that's not.
I mean, I work in the tech space. I mean, apps are a great thing right now. The VA can take a lot of the money that they're wasting on certain things, maybe program a different app and just actually send a push notification. Hey, your VA check's gonna be late. If you want to know more, click here. I mean, it's easy stuff, and it's just not happening because I feel personally there's just other things happening inside of it.
Other potential
Yeah,
priorities.
people just don't want to do it.
I think it's social media in general. I mean, if you push, if you push it out to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, I mean, at some point it's going to disperse. But I think finding key communication points in groups of bodies. So whether that be SVA, so they can push it out to their chapters, so they can push it out. Whether that be the certifying officials who see the students that are pushing it out. I think it's finding the strategic communication points as opposed to trying to push it out to Twitter, where you may or may not actually end up seeing it.
I really like the push notifications in and out. We already have something called e-benefits, And e-benefits isn't exactly the easiest system. There are outages all the time. We get it. But if I was able to have access to view documents and push notifications, it's already, we have apps that are super secure already. So two-factor authentication is super easy to do with that. So I don't see why that can't be an effective means of communication.
I agree with the social media aspect. I think a lot of veterans that return to school or go to school go with dependents. They're married, they have a life, and I think an easy way to communicate with a large population is with an app. And the e-benefits is a good resource, but it's a little complicated to get it set up. So we can get banking information on our phones. So why can't we do the same for a GI Bill for each individual? I think it would be a great resource for a lot of veterans to know where they're at with their GI Bill and what's going on with it if they had an app to look at.
Let's touch a little bit on I think every single one of you touched a little bit on the mental health aspect and the challenges that you faced. What could have been done from an institutional perspective, from VA's perspective, whatever it might be, to kind of help you guys with that, like with addressing some of those issues?
I tried really hard to get mental health care from the VA to the point where I was, so I tried, and I would go, I'd have to go every month to meet with psychiatrist, I don't remember the specific title, to meet with my provider there. It would be the same 30-minute interview of, your baseline questions, like, how are you feeling? Any relationship problems? Have you been drinking? Are you feeling suicidal? How's this? The same slew of questions, a lot of background stuff that could be in a file that I could answer every time. Yes, I'm divorced. I've been divorced. No, I'm not married currently. And it would end up me taking 4 hours out of my day to drive across town, wait for an appointment, get the appointment, wait for the prescription to be filled, and then drive back home. But the medicines didn't work. The doses they were giving were so small, but she had to go up on this incremental level. I was trying to get medication for my ADHD as well, on top of my depression, and she would give me a dose, and I'd say, look, I can tell you right now that that's not going to work. I'm 200 pounds. Like, if I take ibuprofen, I've got to take 800 milligrams. Like, I don't need 5 milligrams of Ritalin. I need something better. She said, well, we're going to do this, and if it doesn't work, we can try again in a month. She ended up prescribing me something, and I just didn't, this could be on me, but I didn't really research what it was, and it turned out it was Zoloft, and I didn't really know that I wasn't supposed to be drinking with it, and I had a manic episode, and ended up totaling my car coming back one night. Didn't really have that much to drink. I had a couple drinks over the course of a 4-hour event, but the combination of that, I remember flying down the highway in my Civic as fast as it could go, trying to do like a Mario Kart power slide into my neighborhood and T-boning into a fire hydrant. And so I didn't even know what I was taking as well. And after that, I just stopped taking everything, and I never went back. I've tried to get back in the system now that I'm up here. I don't have the time to go wait at the DCVA for 17 hours. I've got 3 jobs and a competitive sport career that I do on the side. And I've tried to call, and every time I've waited on the phone for 2.5 hours just on hold without even talking to somebody. So, just give me access. I'm trying.
So I have a different take, especially when it comes to mental health. One thing that I've noticed is, meds and therapy just sometimes aren't enough, or they're not the right pills, or the VA is notoriously known for take all of this and then take all of these for the side effects that you get from over here. So to have access to other ideas, meds and therapy weren't working for me. I had a great support system of friends, and that's how I got linked into the service animal community. And I use my service animal on campus as a way to connect with other student veterans and my other colleagues who are dropping out of college between the ages of 18 and 21 with depression and suicidal ideations and so on, as a tool of, okay, let me help you get the resources. Now, I graduate in May, and I'm leaving. Who's going to be able to do that, on my campus or within that small community after I leave? Yes, I'll be available digitally, and when I come back for homecoming game or whatever, but there needs to be something that's longevity on every college campus specific to veterans, as well as the traditional student body that makes it okay. So how do we destigmatize getting the help? And not for anything, I have a choice this semester because my psychologist only works Tuesdays because he's part-time and makes more money elsewhere. So maybe that's an issue, but I have a choice. Do I go to a once-a-week master's course, or do I go talk to my talk therapist? You know, so having availability of appointments outside of normal duty day may have even helped him. So, yeah.
I guess for me, I think it could be handled at a pretty small level in the state aspect. I think if every school had a person that was more specialized in military counseling, it would be very helpful. Because when I went to counseling with my school, there wasn't a person that understood the military. They didn't understand the camaraderie that's there, or how to address the loss once you leave the military. So just having a person there that's more specialized towards your service members would be helpful. And I think just working with your state or with your universities on that would be a good step forward in that. And I think if VA could partner with universities in that, it would be a huge step for veterans in general. If they could just have that counselor on these campuses, or a master's student that is a veteran trying to work and help other veterans in their counseling and setting up groups with the VA. That'd be something that could help a lot of people.
You actually opened up an amazing segue to what my next question was, and that was related to transition-related challenges that, again, each of you mentioned. Part of that is the camaraderie, heard pretty regularly, and it's something I do hear regularly from students, is that they miss that camaraderie and they want to be connected, but then there's sometimes struggle of getting students engaged on campus as military-connected students because of their families and other external challenges that they might have. So what are some of the ways you feel, one, I guess you wish everyone would know as far as your experience related to transition, and what would maybe help people better inform policy moving forward, one, but then two, what are ways you feel institutions of higher learning could do to better engage with students who may not be ready to self-identify or want to, or know how to engage, like from that social perspective, but still need that camaraderie? Those are loaded questions.
Mandatory fun days.
Yes.
No, just kidding.
I like that. Can we do that across the board?
I mean, it's a challenge. I mean, I think there's several students here, several of us here that have ran student veteran chapters, and that is the age-old question of how do we get people together? We had meetings. We had a scholarship that we would give out that was based off of participation in the organization. It's now a memorial scholarship for one of our members that passed away that's still going. We did monthly fundraisers, we did social activities, and a lot of it is getting people together. A lot of it is you just kind of got to throw different things at the ball and see what sticks. But from an institutional side, support of the campus, having support of the campus for us to do that. There's a pretty common thing among the military. A lot of us like to go shoot. We tried to go, and I'm from Texas, so that's doubly there. We tried to go have a range day, which there was nothing prohibited. We were going to pay for it out of pocket. There was nothing prohibited in our school or club bylines prohibiting that. And we just kind of mentioned, hey, we're going to go do this. We're letting you know. It's an official club activity, but we're not using funds. And they made us go to a VA, one of the VA certifying officials who wasn't part of our organization, but was seen as the veteran authority on campus. And the student life director asked him what he thought. And we had like 30, 40 people wanting to do this. So over 10% of our student veteran population wanted to go shooting. It would have been our biggest event. And he said no because he thought it was a bad idea to have veterans going to the range as a veteran himself. And it was unnecessary bureaucracy that had no business being there. And there was multiple times where the institution would get in the way of us trying to do things, of us having events, of us trying to reach out, and be able to just shoot an email to all the veterans on campus, or have them shoot one for us and say, hey, just FYI, here's some resources. There's a Student Veteran Association. If you guys want to hang out or whatever, just instead of us trying to capture all these contacts, they have that list. That's something every certifying official has, and they refused to send it out themselves and help us engage with the population.
I think it's just, like you said, just kind of the community. I mean, I know at my schools, the veteran population, for one, was pretty non-existent, and when they had vets, they didn't know really how to approach any of us, and they kind of wanted to put us all in a corner, saying, oh, okay, you're a veteran, you must have this, 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 and this, you probably enjoy X, Y, and Z. It's like, no, that's not really my life at all. I mean, granted, you know, right when I started, they tried to introduce me to another student vet, but he was way advanced in his life than I was, and we had nothing in common. So the whole trying to pin a vet with another vet and say, this is going to be your life from now, that doesn't help. Just let us live our lives and just introduce, saying, you know, if I would have known someone like Robert over here, I probably would have been really good. Oh, he seems like things I like. That's awesome. Don't try to just pin me into a corner saying, oh, you're a veteran, you must have PTSD, you must have this, you must need this and this and this stuff. No.
So it's the military-civilian divide.
It is.
And it's helping
It really
translate.
is. And to quickly piggyback on that, veterans tend to hang out with veterans, but one of the things we focused on was getting veterans into the general school population. Unless you go to very specific career paths, generally speaking, you're probably going to be the only veteran in your workplace, or a very small amount. And trying to pigeonhole the veterans together just further exacerbates the problem of we don't know how to integrate with civilian populations.
So it boils down to engagement, right? Different things from an institutional standpoint versus nonprofit, veteran service kind of things. Warrior Scholar Project. I can't say enough good things about them. They put me into shape to get into, once I got into Syracuse, to be able to handle it. However, I was struggling with some of the courses that were, you know, gen eds that they couldn't help with, and that's where I could have used the help, and I wish I had done it. There's a peer advisor program called PAVE that is not on every college campus, where I had a peer advisor for veterans in education, mentor, and I now have 6 that I help on a monthly basis. But you still need to have options, and the SVO is a great place to come together with all of these things, but you can't force the horse to drink water. You can only bring it to them.
How many of you have heard of Warrior Scholar Project? Okay. So what that is it's a nonprofit organization, and this is going to be actually probably another good segue into some of those pieces, but it's a nonprofit organization that works to help educate students and help them build out their academic self-confidence. Because a lot of times you hear from military-connected students, I'm not hired in material, school's just not for me, and then you get them in school and they do really well. And so what Warrior Scholar Project does is they do boot camps throughout the summer. Sometimes they're 2 weeks, 1 week focused on STEM and 1 week focused on the humanities, where they focus on writing and building out those basic skills. And then other weeks they just do a 1 week that focuses solely on humanities. And so they bring in students who are interested in going to school, and they kind of work with them to build up that academic self-confidence. And then they help them get into like high-quality schools, and it's a great tool. Amanda, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or are we ready to segue into the next? All right. So that was my next question.
It was kind of interesting something that you said. I don't want to speak for all vets here, but I know for me, I still struggle with imposter syndrome. It is very, very real. I mean, I remember walking on campus. I got accepted. I'm halfway into the semester, but I remember thinking, I don't belong here. Like, I am 24 years old. I am in a pretty 101 class. Everyone else here is 18. They look at me as the old man. And it's just pretty much kind of, you know, really think I don't belong here. And kind of having organizations like that will help you and kind of tell you, know, you can do this. You're here for a reason. You're here because you know this stuff. That's very helpful. So I know a lot of vets. I have friends that really still struggle with it. Some that don't even want to go to school or try to advance their career because they just feel like they don't. It's not for them. They try to go back into the military and they just feel like that's their only purpose.
How many of you struggled with imposter syndrome?
I've been called a professor at least 3 or 4 times every semester for 3 years now.
I had an internship. Someone thought that I was a program, and I was like, I'm an intern just like you. Oh, look how old. Thanks.
Have you seen The Friends where Chandler is the intern?
Yeah.
I think another, talk about imposter syndrome and being 101 classes. I fought very hard not to have to do a remedial math class when I went to college because I was a fairly bright student. I had great SAT scores, and I went instead into a basic pre-calc class, and there were multiple times I remember crying trying to do my homework at night because it was so frustrated. And it was a point of pride for me originally not to have to do that remedial one, but as I started working on campus and realized how effective that would be, I started encouraging students to take that. But it turns out that like that's a disadvantage to their overall GI Bill because that class doesn't count towards their degree, but it definitely counts towards the number of classes they can take on their GI Bill and those benefits. And I think there's been some effort to kind of mediate that, but I'm not sure if that's something that's actually been implemented as a way for veterans to get these remedial classes without essentially losing portions of their GI Bill.
Right, because then they run out and
They run out.
yeah.
Well, with single parents going to school, you got to work full time sometimes, or work part time, 2 part-time jobs to go to school. Engineering and STEM majors can get an extra year, so maybe there's a way to apply for an extra year for people. You know, I was lucky to get into a 1-year master's program and very condensed. If I didn't, I would have timed out. Maybe it could have helped him as well.
There are some programs, so there's Veterans Upward Bound, which is part of the TRIO program that focuses on helping with address some of those remedial issues prior to, but it still costs money and it still is something that students have to pursue and look into. But yeah, that is definitely a conversation that needs to continue to be had surrounding what are we doing to help with those remedial courses prior to students starting their degree programs and how can we do it in an affordable way. I want to talk a little bit about, I think the imposter syndrome is a huge piece, but then let's talk about the use of some of these community resources and the role you think that they would play or you think that they have played in helping students better succeed in higher education. So whether it's SVA, whether it's Warrior Scholar Project, whether it's RWV, is there a role for those kinds of organizations? And what do you wish schools could do, or what do you think schools should, how do you think they can play with this? It's not a well-articulated question.
Well,
This one's yours.
I believe these organizations are very vital to veterans' success. It's what got our group together was the SVA. We found it online and we started working with them, and it really brought a lot of veterans together, and that created that camaraderie again. Other community, just working with your local community can really bridge the gap between civilian and veterans too. That's what we're working on. We work with our local, it sounds really weird, but our local pubs and bars to do security to raise money, so they pay us and we work as the ID checkers, and that kind of bridges the gap between veterans and civilians there. And we also do a lot of volunteer work during the winter because South Dakota has a lot of snow, so we got 12 inches the other day. So we like to scoop snow for the elderly. So there's a lot of local things that student veteran groups can reach out to. It's just the establishing a student veteran group is the hardest component of that. So it's really important to have these bigger organizations there to help bring that forward.
Having all these nonprofits and NGO type organizations fills the gap between public and private industry, and that's no small task, because there are a lot of gaps and a lot of opportunities. I would rather say in SVA, Warrior Scholar, and even RWV, they all have different ways within the veteran space to fill the gaps of what's missing that could be better served potentially in certain ways from the VA.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great organizations. I think I've made rounds at a lot of them. I've been with SVA, I've been with VFW, I was a Mission Continues Fellow, I've worked for a few here. I think one that hasn't been mentioned that I want to give a shout out to is the Headstrong Project. They provide zero cost counseling services for veterans from very real providers out in town, and it was extremely easy for me to get into it. That was one of the things that I always wanted, was just to be able to sit down with a therapist or a social worker once a week and just work through some of these things that I need to unpack. And I met with one for over a year, and it's probably been the best growth that I've had personally through a lot of these issues. That some military related, some not. And with my new job, I haven't been able to reconnect with him, but I'm working on that. But that's another one I think is phenomenal, is having actual access to not just group counseling, but an in-person relationship with a therapist or social worker or counselor.
I know there's another one, I forgot the whole name of it, it's like a veteran mentoring program. That one's been phenomenal.
Veterani?
There's one that, it's not a student org, but it is kind of a professional organization for vets that I learned about a few years ago, and that's Vets in Tech. And that really helped me out tremendously, because it really is, it's not just, there's veterans in law enforcement, veterans in politics, there's all those different, cliche groups, but this one was, for vets that actually cared more about technology side of the world, and so it was very interesting to talk to another veteran that's, you know, working at Google, working at Facebook, working in Silicon Valley doing things, and kind of hearing their story to say, hey, this is what you should do to reach this level, and yet it can kind of give you one-on-one advice and real life advice instead of just, you're bad, good luck.
Yeah, true. Well, thank you guys. We've been talking a lot, and so now it's your turn to talk. And so we're going to open the floor up for questions. I could keep asking questions, but I want to give you guys the opportunity to also ask questions. Yes.
Are you also listed?
Yes,
We were.
formerly.
No, I mean, none of your office.
No.
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 Yes.
My name is Julie Kirk. I work for the National Association for College Admission Counseling. So we know that for-profit colleges and universities often target veterans because of the way that those institutions can receive funding. There's loopholes that they really target veterans to enroll. So I'm just curious. I think I maybe heard one of you mention experience in enrollment with the for-profit, but just wanted to hear a little bit more about if any of you all experience some of those predatory practices and any recommendations you have for how you can work to hold those institutions accountable.
I was active duty at that time, and sweet, you're going to pay for all my books, and you're going to give me a laptop and a printer, and I can get, you know, full-time work, and it uses exactly 1 penny under what TA was going to authorize to pay, right? This is like the greatest deal ever. Yeah, no, none of those credits actually transferred to a nonprofit space, and I fought tooth and nail to get some of those done, and it didn't work. So if there's a way to, ooh, look, shiny. Education could happen everywhere through the military, through transition, through academia. There are different opportunities to kind of help avoid that. And some schools, the state schools and private schools alike, are trying to find ways around this as well. And if I had known, you know, you get a much better bang for the buck than this for-profit school that still exists by going to Syracuse. Yeah, you know, I would have made a much wiser decision, but is what is.
I think education on that starts from the military itself. You know, one thing we all have in common is we're all in the military. So if you can start pushing, and you did yours while you're on active duty, right? Somebody who you were filing paperwork should have had the smarts to say, hey, no, you shouldn't do this. This is bad. So pushing that through the military, made it more DoD oriented, where the career counselors or whoever is in charge of deciding that and going to do that can educate that well in the military. When veterans get out, they realize what's going on, that this is predatory, and it's just they're trying to sell you snake oil.
I heard a little bit on the tail end of the press conference before this, but kind of was on the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act.
So what's your question related to? Just like where we're standing on it and
Yeah,
stuff?
of course.
So I know that a large group of veteran and military service organizations have joined together to be more proactive in working with both sides of the aisle to find ways to kind of help push through a comprehensive reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. For us, it's really important that it is comprehensive and that it does incorporate protections for those we represent related to equality and accountability, and also provide a strong return on investment for military connected students and all students. So that's kind of where we're standing on all of those pieces. We obviously want to see the closure of the 90-10 loophole. That's going to be one of our biggest priorities, and that to include not just GI Bill benefits, but tuition assistance, MyCAA, and other federal agencies that actually offer scholarships or funds for education purposes. That everything, it should be all-encompassing and not just one of the things that was a big issue last year with PSLF was when we want to see that also obviously maintained and expanded. But one of the challenges that we found with it is that there was a few groups that come to us and said, well, what if we did it just for veterans? What if we did it just for VA? And what if we did it for DoD? And the reality is that service members, veterans, their families, they joined to serve, and so that to have something that's just for them is not going to be enough. They want to see it across the board for those that they've served. So that's where we stand on it, yes.
Tanya, I have a question. If voluntary education, active duty voluntary education, went back to 15-week classes and 12-week classes, even online, we had the community colleges offer that, would you do that? Because we understand that you like the 90-week, the 8-week classes, the 6-week classes. But if we said we'll go back to 12 weeks, 15, would you do that?
She's got some authority here, she says, so it's a good question.
The reason why, while active duty, yes, let me, take these classes that are 8 weeks long, is that it felt like I was accelerating. That, okay, I got this class done, that class done. Meanwhile, over the course of a traditional semester, it's still 3 classes, right? Or 2 classes. So would I would do things a little differently, having more of a presence. I don't want to name the university per se, but there are several that have on campus, and by on campus, I mean on a military installation. Knowing what I know now, yeah, I would have given that a shot. But I was also healthcare, so I could automatically go from day shift to midnights. So that may have put a wrench into it, and what's more important, the mission or my education. And we're going to go mission 100%.
I had another question. You had mentioned about education being important for promotion. Our employer doesn't have that, but they're looking at that. So is that something that you think was valuable? Because those classes were useless after you left the Navy, right?
Air Force.
Air Force.
Now, I haven't been following things since I was medically retired in early 2011 to see how the new EPR system has changed, and we've got a great Air Force Command Chief Master Sergeant who's doing some fantastic things from my active duty, still serving colleagues who are getting ready to retire naturally. So across the board, is education important? Maybe we should figure out how that implies to the career of an individual rather than a promotion point or this or that. I forget the statistics, but I believe that the Coast Guard has a ridiculous number of people with bachelor's degrees that are on the enlisted side, and there's one entire Air Force career where most people are seeking master's degrees as technical application specialists. So people in the military going back to 2001 know that education is important. It's just, how do we implement this on the DoD side? I think that could use some policy review.
So I believe the Navy tried that when I was in. To advance to E7, you had to have an associate's degree. That worked probably a couple of years, but then they saw that the young lady that asked about the predatory schooling, that was a big issue that came of that. We were seeing a lot of E7s or a lot of E6s to get promoted. They were getting, I don't want to say crap degrees, but they were getting associate degrees in things that really don't matter or did not really help their job. And then kind of like Adam, when they got out, they were useless. So you would have, a 55-year-old chief who did so many years in the Navy. He says he had an associate's degree to get promoted. Now he's out of the military and is just trying to finish up to get a bachelor's. The school says, oh, we're not accepting any of that. So to that person, they've done all their stuff in the military. They were told this, but now they are 55 years old, sitting in a 101 class with a bunch of 18-year-olds. The depression kicks in. The whole imposter syndrome kicks in. So the cycle starts all over again. I know that's I know that answers a lot of your question, but that's why I strongly do not like that.
So you don't like the idea of associates of general studies that maximizes your JFT because it wasn't going to be a great help to you once you got out?
It didn't help the intention was good, but the application it was terrible because we just had a bunch of E7s that just got something and they would use their benefits or just have the military pay for a BS associates from that predatory school, and it's just not worth anything. They didn't learn anything. They're just doing this to check off a box and get a promotion. It's not helping.
The Air Force actually has its own accredited community college of the Air Force, which is why Air Force veterans tend to have a higher completion rate of master's degrees, bachelor's degrees, and a lot of them, out of all 5 of the branches, they have the highest percentage of those with associate's degrees. And I had a colleague when I did my fellowship that did his paper on the need for expanding that from a community college of the Air Force to a community college of the Armed Forces. So as opposed to using, I think it's H accreditation that most of the military uses, those credits don't really transfer taking that Air Force model and expanding it so that those credits are recognized. His particular instance was he had a master's degree, and he had got a master's degree while he was in, but he had gone through every avionics school the military could offer in his 8 years in the Marine Corps in Pensacola, taught by aerospace professors, and none of that transferred over, even though these were the same college courses that civilian peers were going through. I think that would be a really useful solution, is expand that Air Force model into the DoD, so these are legit accredited courses.
Okay, so Air Force has 5 classes of general education, but the rest is JFT credit, or what the Air Force calls community college and the Air Force credit.
Okay.
So it's the same thing. So then they go to the bachelor's side, and that's just building off of what they've already created. So that's the model that you're suggesting, is that it has a foundation of JFT credit, or whatever you want to call military credit. We call it JFT.
So
Yeah.
ACE doesn't evaluate Air Force though, typically.
Right.
So their
But
credit,
their foundation is what we would call JST.
yeah.
With the 5 classes of traditional credit, so getting you an associate of general studies, as opposed to an associate of arts or associate of science, which is what you're really talking about. So you like to see a traditional model, but modeled in the sense of the Air Force's program that encourages education.
Yes, but one that tangibly translates into a viable associate's degree in traditional higher education.
So perhaps regional accreditation like the Community College of the Air Force. And still, that's not a perfect system. My MOS, my FSC was medic. Syracuse University, this college, that college, doesn't matter which school I went to, other than community colleges, they weren't going to give me credits for EMT. They weren't going to give me phys ed credits. You know, some of the ones that should be common sense, or, okay, well, when I went to Piedmont Community College, just south of here in Charlottesville, they accepted EMT Basic as gen ed credits because they had an EMT Basic program. So it's still not a perfect system, but perhaps looking at how do we accredit might be a little bit more appealing. I was able to get some waivers for some of my Airman Leadership or Soldier Development E5 school. I was able to get some of those credits transferred in, but it still took me 2.5 semesters to make that happen.
So we have time for one more question, and then we'll be around afterwards if anyone else has other questions.
So, in talking about imposter syndrome, do you think if there were, so, maybe there's 5 vets on your campus, and so you're going to feel that, much more acutely. If there's 100 vets, is it better, or do you think no matter what, a vet's going to feel that, or does it tie into the population on your campus?
I think vets are going to feel that regardless until they have a chance to talk to other veterans and realize that that's not that's a common feeling.
And there are some professors out there that might not value a veteran on campus. I was told that there's a professor somewhere around, somewhere in the United States, that feels that we shouldn't have any place in higher education. We had our choice, and we chose to enlist. So changing mindsets from not only our traditional students, and half my students' population that I run into, they'll never know a veteran. As well as me sitting next to them in class and learning, okay, well, you're not that stereotype that the media says, or social media, I should say. You're not this mold. So it's changing hearts and minds, whether it's at the administrative level, whether it's our traditional peers, professors. It's about changing perception of what we are able to do and how we bring military skills to the classroom, like leadership, taking responsibility, and never leaving somebody behind.
Thank you guys for coming today. Hopefully this was informative and helpful,